Hailee Steinfeld is amazing at playing female leads who are effortlessly cool, especially if they have a side shave, a pink side shave that is, especially if they're great at fighting, and also great at swinging around and climbing and jumping through cityscapes. You know, the type of female action girl who's more athletic than buff, but their strength really comes from form, from skill they've earned. We can really see the signs of how long they worked at it, how much it's a part of who they are, and we're not just talking about any athletic action girl with a pink side shave. Specifically, it's protector types. Characters who have a favorite person in the whole world. You know, someone younger than them, someone who looks up to them, tries to keep up with them. And there's this great learning relationship. Hailee Steinfeld tests them and they succeed. And for these younger characters, Hailee Steinfeld is just their most favorite person ever in the entire world. All they want is to be with her, and there comes a time when they can't, but they go anyway, and that really messes everything up. In fact, this younger character as a whole kind of messes everything up. It's kind of this character's whole arc, actually. It ends up being all about embracing their disruptive nature. But I'm getting sidetracked here, back to our action girls. It's the kind of character who is tough, but also emotional. They're willing to be vulnerable, but only with the people they love. They may hold back from big displays of affection, but that's only because they prefer subtler gestures, like, I don't know, leaning against your shoulder maybe? I don't know, something like that. In general, they actually are comfortable with the idea of attraction, but in their own romantic life, they prefer to take things slower. Sometimes so slow that their relationships fall apart before they can even start. But I mean, it's kind of fate that they can't be together, since after all, they are from different worlds. That's ultimately what keeps them apart. That and her romantic interest parents don't really like her, although they can be won over. And we kind of root for the romance to work out because these characters don't really have anyone else. They're orphans, sort of, depending on whether we're in part 1 or part 2 of their story. Really, they both have like a tough, principled father figure they can model themselves after completely. Father figures who don't always see eye to eye with how they do things, but who end up making an unexpected sacrifice and ultimately leaving them, or end up leaving them and then making the unexpected sacrifice. But either way, we end the relationship arc with a warm father-daughter moment full of empowerment and encouragement, which is going to lean into their reunion with that younger character, their most cherished loved one who they wronged. So if you have a character like this, the kind of girl who's not really girly at all, but still feminine in her own way, who's kind of a jock, but not dumb or anything, the kind of character who gets awesome fight scenes and moving emotional scenes, who seems pretty emotionally stable day to day, but is also haunted by trauma in her past that kind of forced her to grow up too fast, and then more trauma that forced her out of her own world, which is the worst thing ever for her. But hey, at least she can spend time getting stronger, as if, you know, being better at the action girl stuff is what's going to solve her problems, when really the true obstacles in her life have always been emotional, and her arc won't be about confronting a villain, but confronting a reality that she's been avoiding. If you have a character like that, I strongly recommend casting Hailee Steinfeld. Yeah, so point is, it's not a coincidence that my two favorite stories of the last 5 years have the same amazing character, so much the same that they even cast the same actress. And it's not just me, these are fan favorite characters, people love these characters. So I want to know about that. Who is this character? How do they work? What's the appeal? And how does one write this character? Can I distill it into a formula that you could all use in your stories and then proceed to cast Hailee Steinfeld? Okay, so let's start with the appeal. Surface level, it's easy to see what makes this character type appealing. And I don't just mean that they're very crushable, although they are that too. That is a big appeal. But I mean, they really offer a lot of things people love. They're really cool, they're strong, they're empowering, they get awesome fight scenes, but then they also get moving emotional scenes and arcs. They can do both organically. It doesn't feel forced at all. This is not the stoic, unemotional variant of the strong female character who either doesn't have a personality or has one, but is just kind of unpleasant. But they also aren't emotional to the point that they feel weak or fragile or manic or hysterical or defined by romance. They really sit at the middle of a lot of different Venn diagram bubbles. They're both feminine and masculine in certain ways. They're protectors, but they also need to be protected. They're big sisters, but also daughters, but also love interests. They're completely alone in the world, but also all about family. They're confident and put together, but also have deep, complex trauma in their past. Why have just one of any of those when we can have all of those? Why not just check all the boxes, make a character everyone loves? And we'll talk about how the character manages to be all these things organically in just a second, because that is not normal at all. But I think first and foremost, it comes down to how these characters work structurally. So what's the setup here? The setup is a lie. The way the story invites us into the experience of the Hailee Steinfeld character is so beautifully deceptive, and starts with the most important component here, which is the younger counterpart. The younger counterpart is one of our main avenues into the Hailee Steinfeld character. We're predisposed to liking this older, cooler character not only because they're strong and capable, but because we have a protagonist we strongly identify with who thinks the world of Hailee Steinfeld. Biggest Hailee stan ever. So it's very simple. We're adopting this glowing view of the older character secondhand. We relate to the younger character step step into their shoes and see this character through their eyes. And that is where the magic happens. Because the fact that we're introduced to these older characters, not objectively so to speak, but via a young person's perspective, that allows the story to trick you. Our young characters have their whole story arcs outlined. They've written their own stories with very straightforward trajectories. Their trajectory is Hailee Steinfeld. That is the end goal. And that's the mode we're in Act 1. We're maybe halfway up the hill, and we can see Hailee standing way up there right before the peak. She's there, she's waving at us, she's encouraging us, helping us, she's guiding us to follow in her footsteps. We may even see her have climax level battles, the type we expect to have at the end of our arcs once we're at her level, and we get to see her win those battles. So she's doing great. She's going to achieve all her goals, all her dreams. She's got nothing to worry about. And me, the younger counterpart, I'm doing fine. My only concern is, can I get there in the end? Because largely we're the same, so I should get there just like her, but I am a little different from her. Hopefully that won't matter. But then the inexplicable happens. Both characters fail. We thought that was an impossibility, but lo and behold, it happens. And it happens in a way that also just makes no sense at all. The younger counterpart actually succeeds, but that success somehow causes everything to go wrong. And we're like, what the heck? That wasn't the deal at all. You're supposed to be congratulating me. And then our older character, our protector, cannot protect the people she cares most about, which is also impossible. This character was lacking nothing in protection abilities. We saw time and time again how strong they were. They won all the battles, defeated all the monsters, except one. Somehow the protector is the one who ends up hurting the one she was trying to protect. What? Huh? How does that even make any sense? And thus the jig is up. Deception exposed. The problem all along was that the trajectory the story incepted into our brains was based on a child's understanding of the world. If I can grow up big and strong, I can solve all my problems. I can win. I can succeed. I can beat the bad guys. But that's not what it means to grow up. That is not what the main character's arc is from the start. Obviously, no little kid's prediction of their own future ever comes true. And what they consider success at that stage of development was not success either. The world is way too complex for success to be about saving the day or fulfilling your dumb little childhood goal. The world is way too complex for growing up to mean just being good at fighting. This person we looked up to so much was flawed in ways that our infantile, immature mind couldn't understand. This complex world requires someone with all kinds of emotional strengths we need to just discover first before we can even think about development and finding success of some kind. So at this point, both characters' arcs restart. Both characters find themselves at the bottom of the real mountain this time and have to discover, usually in a similar way, what it really means to move forward, to grow up. They need to learn what real strength is, what this complex world requires of them, not just physical strength, but strength of character, and also what it means, what it looks like to succeed, which may be the opposite of what we thought it looked like as kids. That is the structure. So why is it so compelling? I think aside from the personalities and the relationship dynamics, there is something just exciting about the structure's natural pacing. We start out with a character who needs to develop, who has a clear trajectory, and they're advancing on that trajectory. That's great, that's exciting. And when that implodes, not only does it feel really realistic, because of course that was kind of a childish way of seeing things, it was naive, it was simplistic, but it also feels like the story itself is expanding. We realize what we thought was this younger character's whole arc was really just the first steps of something way more complex and meaningful. And this other character who we thought was fully developed, psych, they're not, and they get a whole arc too. We weren't even necessarily expecting an arc from them. We thought they were just there to be cool and to be admired, be a benchmark, support the main character. But now the story has cracked their character wide open, and we have this whole new world of potential and meaning for them as well. And because that old trajectory was so simple and so clear to us, it's like we were blinded by it. We couldn't imagine things going any differently. Now we have no idea where the story is actually going to go. We were wrong about everything. Now anything could happen. And not actually anything, but it feels that way. So that's exciting too. Another subtle way it expands the story is that we have a lot of variety now. We had development in one direction before this. Now our Miles Powder character is developing in a completely different direction. The story feels different now. And our Vi-Gwen is developing backwards. Or at least the way the story exposes their lack of emotional development feels like regression. And by the end, the dynamic is reversed entirely. The older character is trying to figure out what to do and where to go, and meanwhile, the younger character has already figured it out. Now the younger one is ahead and the older one is behind. And before we felt admiration for Vi-Gwen and pity for Powder Miles, and now we're feeling admiration for Jinx Miles and pity for Vi-Gwen. So our relationship to the story also feels very different. It's also expanded. And now with our understanding understanding of how the Hailee Steinfeld arc is working structurally, I think we can also understand why this character checks so many boxes and fits into so many Venn diagram bubbles. It's because these characters are so defined by not being as strong or as developed as they think they are, or at least as others think they are. It's because these characters have essentially gone through fake development. They have all these secondary characteristics we associate with real maturity. They're strong, confident, respected, cool, etc. They're everything we associate with growing up. But in reality, emotionally, they're still just as much of a kid as their younger counterparts, or at least just as much of a teenager. In reality, all that strength has not made them invulnerable, it's left them very vulnerable. It hasn't given them direction, at least not enough direction. They still feel very lost. It hasn't removed their desperation or their fears. They're still very afraid. So what that means is that in order to tell the story of this character, the narrative has to explore both sides of the dichotomy. We get scenes where the character is projecting adult confidence and strength, and we get scenes of them being revealed to be scared, vulnerable children, because they are both. They've worked hard enough to earn some cool, flashy plot moments, but those wins have almost nothing to do with the actual problems they need to solve. And when they're facing those problems, they appropriately feel like they're at zero development, because that is actually where they're at. I think you see this dynamic very clearly when it comes to romance. When they're in projecting adult confidence mode, they get to be all cool and comfortable with attraction, but once it comes down to the real them, that's when we see them lacking romantic experience, or really lacking emotional experience, and wanting to take things very slow or not even wanting to start at all. This dynamic also determines their aesthetic. Their look, their exterior, should reflect the cool persona that they think they have or that others think they have, and determines their gender dynamic. When they're in projecting confidence mode, they're a little more masculine or boyish, or at least not as feminine, because this idea of adulthood is very boyish. It's fighting bad guys, it's punching stuff, that and, avoiding emotions, which also typically feels more masculine. And that does make sense, by the way, since they only have masculine role models in their lives. But then when it comes down to who they actually are, we see the softer side, which is more feminine. And I think their true development after their first arc fails ends up being more feminine too, since it's more about confronting emotional challenges and relationship issues, which typically feels more feminine. And that said, it's not like they're switching between masculine and feminine, or developing from more masculine to more feminine. Everything is a mix of both with them. And just like their abilities, their masculinity or their boyishness or lack of femininity, that is a part of them. That's not going away. And when they lose in masculine contests, the answer isn't getting feminine support, it's getting masculine support, even if it is a softer form of masculine support. Okay, so in terms of putting pen to paper, here's the basic outline you can use to write a character like this in your own stories. It starts with two characters, you have to have both. We got the younger character and the older Hailee Steinfeld character. Make these characters close, make them care very much about each other, and establish the dynamic of the younger character following the older character, trying to catch up and doing a pretty good job of catching up. And meanwhile, the older character seemingly exists as just a benchmark. She does have her own things she's dealing with, but she's mainly a protector from plot stuff, and she succeeds in that role. She wins, and it's cool, but be secretly building a world that's more complex than our characters think. And make sure both characters, but especially Hailee, does not have any tools to deal with these complexities. And this will lead to the younger character succeeding, but also failing in ways they couldn't even anticipate, and we certainly didn't anticipate. And it will lead to the older character failing to protect who they need to protect the most, and actually hurting them instead because of their lack of emotional development. This will be a low point for both characters, and it's going to lead to them both essentially having to restart their arcs, this time developing emotionally to be able to take on the world, to confront the one thing you've been avoiding, to accept harsh realities, to become who you are, not who your role models are. The younger character is going to figure that out while the older character is still struggling. They're going to get their big climax, their character arc full of empowering self-determination and acceptance. And meanwhile, the older character does finally confront reality and maybe start on a new path. But to be honest, I don't really know where to go after that, because the rest of Hailee Steinfeld's arc hasn't come out yet in both stories. So I guess we'll see and I'll make an update. But I mean, that should be more than enough to get you guys started. But anyway, your Hailee character should oscillate between two modes or be a mix of both modes. Cool, confident, unflappable, maybe a little more masculine or boyish, or at least a little less feminine, closer to the example set by their dear old dad. And then on the other side, how they really are. Vulnerable, lost, afraid, confused about themselves, and very much in need of support and love. Some scenes they're firmly one or the other, but most scenes they're at least somewhat colored by both. In terms of who this character is, Hailee Steinfeld's major strengths are physical. She is great at handling the typical plot challenges, the henchmen, the villains of the week, and that gives them confidence and coolness and respect that also gets them far, but not far enough. And their major flaws are emotional. They struggle with avoidance, they struggle with difficult emotional confrontations, difficult emotional truths, and they sometimes have a hard time getting close to people as well. It's often much easier for them to disengage from relationships rather than surrender to them, and that may be a development that they're heading towards in the next part of the story, I guess we'll see. And their major character needs are interpersonal. People are all they have in this world, and they will do anything to protect the people they care about most. They may not have the right tools to do so, they may may not be emotionally mature enough to do so, but they are prepared to fight the world for the person they love. Okay, now this video is of limited usefulness if I'm basically saying, make this character exactly with this exact arc and these exact relationships and this exact haircut. You can't just write Vi into every single story, even if maybe you'd want to. So let's extrapolate out a bit more generally. What can we learn from this character model in a broader sense? And I guess to ask from a different angle, a very important angle, how can we use what we learned about Hailee Steinfeld to alleviate the burdens of the good, strong female character shortage? We've all seen that apparently people have trouble writing these characters. We get women who fall into the same prejudice stereotypes audiences don't like, or who break out of the stereotypes in ways people equally don't like. Doesn't seem to make a difference if it's a woman leading the writing team or a man. Doesn't make a difference if you're a dude in the audience or a woman acting in these roles. Seems like people are really just struggling across the board with a strong female character concept. And looking at our Hailee Steinfeld strong female characters, seems like they avoid all these common pitfalls. So what can we learn from them in that regard? And let's move past the general obvious stuff. Yes, give your female characters flaws. Yes, make them fail, make them get hurt, make them emotional without making them fragile, make them attractive without letting sexuality and romance define them. I don't want to talk about the basics you can get from any well-written female character here. I want to talk about what we can learn from this character. So let me give 4 simple tips from the Hailee Steinfeld model. Number 1, make your character strong in the wrong way. Physical strength doesn't need to equate one-to-one with beating story obstacles. I think the first Gal Gadot Wonder Woman did an excellent job with this. She was incredibly strong, but the narrative wasn't demanding strength from her. It was demanding knowledge of the world, and she was weak in that department. But again, like the Hailee Steinfeld characters, this mix of strength and weakness gave us badass action scenes where we win and scary vulnerable scenes where we lose. Number 2, make the character's strength a part of them, meaning don't just tack it on to the end of who they are as a bonus. Oh, they're also a martial arts master. No, Vi is a boxer. It's a big part of who she is. Gwen is an athlete. We see these identities in how the characters dress, in how they do random things that don't even require martial artistry or athleticism. We see in how other characters relate to them. It doesn't need to be everything they talk about all the time everywhere, but the important thing is that it feels like it's there because that's the character. Not because it's on a checklist of what we think people will like, not because it's making a statement about gender, not because we want to give the character more of an edge, not because we need her to be the best in every way in comparison to the other characters. No, it's a character first quality. Number 3, make the character's strength a double-edged sword. Vi punches out bad guys and she punches out her sister. Gwen's high-level Spidey skills are a big part of what makes Miles look up to her, but it's also what creates distance in their relationship. In both Spider-Verse movies, the moments that separate them come because Gwen is a more capable Spider-Person than Miles. She's better suited to fight or to join the super elite Spider Forces. Granted, we learned there are other reasons for this, but the point is that physical strength doesn't just solve problems, it creates them as well. And lastly, number 4, connect the character's strength to their relationships. There's a slippery slope where you make a character physically strong, and strong characters are cool, and cool characters are aloof, and aloof characters are unemotional, and unemotional characters are inhuman and cold and wooden. What happened? I just wanted my character to be able to kick butt. There are lots of ways to avoid this trap, but the Hailee Steinfeld character avoids it through having a defining character goal and identity of protector. All that strength is for my relationships, for these people I care about, for this one person, in one way or another. Compare that to a character whose goal is to win the war, or to survive, or ooh, it's a mystery. Those are the characters who, not all the time, but who are more susceptible to falling down the slippery slope. You will more easily find yourself in a situation where relationships feel stilted because they're at odds with the type of cool loner ass kicker you've written. And the Hailee Steinfeld character is not a loner, or at least their goal is not to be. Everything they do is for the goal of having close, caring relationships, so we have relatively no problem with creating organic, intimate moments with these characters, and by extension expanding the character's range to include all the softness and vulnerability and fun those relationships afford us. So again, lots of ways of writing good, strong female characters, lots of ways of solving all these problems, and also I'll emphasize here, I don't think this just applies to writing strong female characters. This stuff is obviously applicable to writing good, strong male characters as well, or good, smart characters, or good leaders, or good villains, or whatever. Lots of forms this is going to take, but just chop off some of their hair and cast Hailee Steinfeld. I think that sums up what we learned today. Subscribe. If you're a fan of the content, consider supporting this channel on Patreon. We have a great little Patreon Discord server going. We also do monthly group calls where we analyze stuff. It's a good time. Huge thanks to everyone on there. Shout out specifically to high-tier patron Movie Lifter. As some of you may know, I'm coming off of a long, much-needed break, and I was able to do that thanks to you guys. The most mentally punishing part of content creation is that it makes you feel like you just need to work endlessly and upload endlessly, and then your quality plummets and your health goes down the drain and you just start hating everything about everything. And it's platforms like Patreon that really just break the hold of this illusion, this genjutsu, and helps creators be more responsible for prioritizing themselves in ways that make sense. So that's what you're giving creators like myself by choosing that method of support, so thank you. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.